Welcome to Muslim Apologetics Australia. So you would have heard on social media, they're posting how India's divorce rate is only 1% compared to other places of the world, like if we compare it to the West, in America, it's something like 50%. If it's in Portugal, it's something like 94%. How is it possible that a country like India, which is a third world country, considered a third world country, living below the poverty line, how is it possible that in the West, where there's secularism, there's democracy, there's liberalism, there's a free world where we can express ourselves the way we'd like to express ourselves, we're economically powerful, how is it possible that the divorce rate in the West compared to India, how is there such a significant difference? And some people have given their objections. They said, these statistics are poor, these statistics aren't accurate, and they're giving their different levels of excuses. But there's one particular comment I wanted to address, and it's coming from Bondmeme Bomb 2. He writes, as an Indian myself, it's pretty common thing not just in India, but in a lot of South Asian to Southeast Asian countries, there is this societal expectation that you should be married, you need to have kids, you need to continue your family name. And then he speaks about arranged marriages are all too common. Sometimes people don't even get to see the groom until the day of the wedding. It is the equivalent of meeting a stranger and spending the rest of your life with them. He then writes, if anyone does get divorced, it leaves this social stigma on a person. There isn't any way to describe it. Partially due to normalization of divorce in the West, people aren't as turned off when they find out a person has been divorced, whereas social status is king in South Asia. Being divorced feels unspeakable. Somehow you're forced to maintain this image of being happy with a random person your parents made you marry, assuming life will go well. A lot of times people are unhappy in these relationships, yet they don't want their social status to change, so they stay in these regretful marriages. Now, there's a lot here to unload. But inshallah, I'll do my best to address this. In a way, some of the things that he said are true, whereas, a divorce is seen as something abhorrent, it's not good, and that you need to do your best to keep the marriages together. But is this really bad? That's what I want to discuss, because his comment at the end of his paragraph was that they force themselves to stay in these regretful marriages in order to keep that social status, because being divorced is seen as something bad, right? But I want to counter this argument, because although divorce is celebrated in the West, it's also shunned. I mean, how do I know this? Because if you were to ask an average guy that is single, he's got money, he's got wealth, he's got a good job, a good paid job, and if you asked him, would you marry a divorced woman that has kids, or would you marry a single woman? He would go for someone that's single, that doesn't have kids. So the question I need to ask is, doesn't the West also view a divorcee to be something bad? I mean, go ask all those women out there that have got kids that are trying to get married and they want to get married to a single guy. They can't find him. The only thing that she'll find is maybe another guy that has kids. Very rarely you'd find a single guy putting his hand up and saying, unless he's got other reasons to marry her. I don't know, maybe he's got other social issues or problems that he's just trying to fit in. Maybe he's got some other benefits he wants from her. We don't know. But very rarely you'll see a single man put his hand up, and vice versa. If it's a woman, she's not going to go for a man that has kids and so forth. She's going to go for a man that doesn't have kids or hasn't been through divorce and so forth, right? And even if you want to take the kids out of the equation, suppose it's a single person that has had multiple divorces. Now she's going to be really cautious. She's going to be like, something's going on here. Why would I marry this person that has multiple failures in marriage? So to assume to say the West doesn't look at divorce as a bad thing or something that doesn't affect the social norms or the status in the West, this is wrong. This is wrong. They do look at it as an important factor, and they look at it as a serious factor, and sometimes most times it determines whether they would accept being engaged in such a relationship. And the second point I want to make on this is that he says that divorce is seen as a really bad thing in not just in India, but in South Asian and Southeastern countries. Now, this is interesting because when you look at the Australian man in Australia, I'm not sure about America and United Kingdom, I'm specifically talking about Australia. Many Australian men are marrying women from not really India, but Asia and Southeast Asia. And when you ask these men, why are they marrying women from these countries, is because they would say things like, she's more tied to the house, she's more respectful towards her husband, they don't like to divorce at any given opportunity, because the Western women, soon as something happens in the house, the first option is, he's a loser, he'll never change, leave him. This is what's said to her. The psychologists or whoever, they'll tell her, this is the end, finished, go find yourself another man. You don't need to stick around with this loser, right? But Asian women generally, or parts from Southeast Asia, they tend to be more patient. They're not as obnoxious as a lot of these Western women. And so the Australian men who have fed up with the Western women, they go and tend to marry women from Asian countries. My boss at my job, he's had a divorce. He was with an Australian woman. He himself went and married a woman from the Philippines. So it's very, very common for them to do this. So is it a bad thing to see divorce as a bad thing? Yes and no. Of course, if the partner is abusive and is constantly, is beating her up and doing all these terrible things, yes, of course, divorce is a good thing. But for every little argument and so forth, I can't handle this, blah, 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 and divorce, the West makes it very easy, doesn't look at it as something trivial, but it does. Because in certain aspects, I've given you examples where it does. but they make it much, much easier. Leave him, let him go. Don't worry about it. You can find someone else. It's easy. Even in Islam, we believe there's a balance. There's always an extreme in all circumstances. So you may find one extreme, for example, in India, where they'll have that culture where divorce is so bad that they stemmed from that culture where if the husband died, then they would burn the wife. This was a really abhorrent tradition because it shamed the family. She went and married another man. So that's one extreme, right? And then the other extreme is the West, where they have a mild argument and this continues, and the first option for them is divorce, find someone else. Don't waste your life trying to fix this person. Forget about the kids, don't worry, they'll fit into another man's life, whatever. And what you find is she tries to fit herself with another man and her kids, and then that falls out too. She thinks she's going to find someone better. He turns out to be even worse than the one she had previously. And then this continues. And what we have is all these children being born into wedlock or raised in single parenthood. And what we find is that the statistical records show that most of the crimes committed by youth, when they look at their lives, they come from single parenthood. This is a statistic that no one can deny. So this point actually addresses that argument, because the atheistic or the secular liberal feministic mindset is, if you're unhappy in your marriage and you have these kids, then just let go, leave. Why should you live in that sort of relationship, right? But we need to weigh up, and this is what they don't do. We need to weigh up the evil with the good. Should you leave that person because you want to have that self-serving relationship where it's all about you, right? Those kids didn't make that decision. You made that decision. So is it better to live with that decision, live with that unhappiness, and still raise those children in that household, where those children then get raised up in a household where there's a mother and a father figure? Because although he may not be the best person to stick around with, he's still raising your children, and it's beneficial for your children. And those children are still being fathered, which means it is less likely that they will fall into crime. Is that better, or is a self-serving identity better, where you need to be fulfilled, forget what happens about your children, just go with another man? Why should you put up with that? Is that better? So, see, the atheist would say it's better that she fulfills her self-desires, because atheism is about self-desires. It's about reaching the pinnacle of happiness in your life. God damn, who cares about everyone else? That includes your children. Alhamdulillah, that's the difference between Islam and a lot of these Western ideologies and these feministic ideologies, where in Islam it is encouraged, even if she's unhappy or you're unhappy, you should still try and push forward in raising those children. Stick together as much as you can. Now, once those children grow up and you no longer can bear each other's environment, then sure, but do it for the children. Do it for the children. Let them raise up healthy, happy, at least with a mother and father figure. Not go through divorce and all of these financial crises, because we know that when divorce happens, there's many financial crises where these women have to go then seek donations to bring food and shopping to the house because they're struggling to provide as a single parenthood. This, even if she's working, she's still struggling. Now, a feminist may argue, oh no, she needs a good job and that's why she needs a career path. That's not the only thing that the kids need. They need nurturing at home. They need someone to be there. It's not always about finance. Many of these women who have said, I've got the money, I've got this, I've got that, their children have been neglected mentally. Their children are being raised by other people, not the mother. And then they complain why their children no longer respect them anymore. And the reason why the atheist or the liberal community or the Western community, why they emphasize on self-happiness so much, that it's all about you. Because, wallahi, they don't have the concept of ahirah. They don't have the concept of, I'll be patient in this world with whatever test God has given me, even if he's a bad husband, or he's a husband that's not treating me the way he should be treating me. The reason why they're out is because this is the only dunya they have. And to be honest with you, God forbid, if I was an atheist or a secular liberal, I'd have that mindset too. Who cares about the kids? Who cares about, my husband? It's all about me. I'm going to self-seduce because this is the only life I have. But see, Islam puts that perspective, puts that beautiful perspective. It says, no, this isn't the only life. This is just the first life. The second life, it is eternal bliss. It's forever. So who cares if you don't fulfill true happiness here? Because true happiness isn't everlasting here. True happiness is in the Akhirah. So the Muslim woman or the Muslim man is patient with his spouse. The Muslim man has got the worst wife sometimes. She constantly does his head in, never gives him a mental break. And we've seen this in the time of the Sahaba. In the time of the Sahaba, there was a man, a companion, who divorced his wife at the grave. Imagine this. And some of the companions said, why did you do that? Why didn't you divorce her in real life? He said he wanted to be patient. He wanted all the rewards in this world. But in the next life, he didn't want to spend Jannah with her. So he divorced her at the grave for the sake of his children. He wanted to keep his house together. SubhanAllah. So look at the difference. Look at the mentality difference. And you see the feminists today of the hijabis, the Muslim women today, straight away divorce. Straight away divorce. But look how the companions lived. And like I said before, you need to weigh up the good with the bad. Do you want to follow the Western concept where they've just made divorce so easy? Or do you want to follow the model of Southeast Asian countries or the Muslim countries where divorce is made a bit more difficult? And the reason being is because of the things that I've mentioned, the tragedy that comes out of divorce. Now, the West argues, that's barbaric, that's oppression. But when they look at their own statistics, 50% divorce rate in America, 95% divorce rate in South American countries. And all of these children being raised by single parenthood where crime is going through the roof. So which one would you choose? We know which one you would choose because we're looking at the lifestyle of Australian men and they're running to South Asian women. So something's gone wrong. Something's gone wrong in their mentality. And this claim that, the parents choose their spouse, parents choose a person, arranged marriages, and they get to choose a person that they've never, they're not choosing the person. They have to be with the person that they just meet on the wedding day. They see him for the first time and they can't bail out. They need to accept this. Now, of course, in Islam, we don't have this because there needs to be consent. We don't believe this in Islam. But I want to compare the culture of the Indians who are pagan And so, unfortunately, some of the Muslims have fallen into this, where they accept arranged marriage. There's a difference, and I need to explain this. There's a difference between arranged marriages in Islam and arranged marriages in paganistic Indian cultures and so forth. There's a difference because, yes, there's arranged marriages in Islam, but you still need the consent. Consent is something that is required. The Prophet ﷺ said clearly that a woman's consent is her silence. That's her approval. And of course, back then, if that means she doesn't object. So there's consent in Islam. But when we look at the paganistic Indian rituals, there is no consent. They're basically forced into this. But I'm going to show you why even that is better, or well, it's equivalent to the claim that, these women are forced into these marriages, and therefore that's what leads to them being unhappy. But when we look at the Western lifestyle, even when the couples are friends from high school, they get married, you hear after 25 years they've been married, she turns around and says, I've fallen out of love with this person. I've fallen out of love. So where is this guarantee that they talk about, arranged marriages are bad because, they're forced into this, they don't really love each other? For me, love grows, right? You could meet someone and then marry them, and you could fall in love. You could be friends for life, and what happens? She turns around and says, I've fallen out of love with him. I've fallen out. It just happened. I can't really help it. I really don't love him anymore. Imagine how bad that is. Can you imagine giving 20 years, 25 years commitment to one person, and she turns around and says, I don't want to be with you anymore? And many, many, many stories are alike like that. That's actually worse. That's actually worse than having to stay with someone until your children grow up, right? Having to bear the responsibility of that person. Then comes suicide, depression, drugs, alcohol, and you know what. So it's tragic. And I also want to point to another point in contention, is that Bond speaks about how there's a lot of people who are unhappy in these relationships in the South Asian countries because of the stigma of divorce and so forth. But one can also argue that a lot of Westerners are also unhappy with their marriages. And the only reason why a lot of them are keeping these relationships are due to financial reasons. Going to court, having to fight over the assets. I personally know of a family who's Western, and the husband and wife, they don't sleep in the same room, they sleep in separate rooms. And they've made an agreement that they will stay together in the house. They'll be recognised by the government as married couples, but they'll only be friends inside the house. And the reason they do this is because they don't want to then go through the court process, go through the difficulty in childcare, and the difficulties raised in financial stresses and problems where they're going to have to split the assets, which is going to financially hurt both couples. So they choose to remain in these relationships because of the financial factors associated to this. So when you want to then point a finger at the
Southeastern countries, because the only reason why they're keeping their marriages is because of these the status of, because divorce is looked at something controversial and bad. Then one could also point a finger to the West and say the reason why these marriages are kept together, what else is left with these long marriages, is because of the financial circumstances. Otherwise, they're really not really happy. They're really not happy, but it's because of financial reasons they're together. So one could also then project that argumentation towards Western marriages. The truth of the matter is that a society that has marriages sustains itself much better, and we can see that economically, we can see that spiritually, morally. Society is made up of marriages, whether it be Muslim nations or Western nations. But we can see how Western nations are losing themselves morally, spiritually, and they're losing themselves when it comes to crime and so forth. And a lot of these evils are associated with drugs, alcohol, godlessness, and divorce rates. This is all associated together, and even the population rates. We see Muslim nations doing far better when it comes to population rates, the growth numbers and so forth, and we can see the decline in Western nations because they're going to this self-serving, divorce, drugs, alcohol, crimes and so forth are followed, and they're trying to encourage, during the baby boom, they've tried to encourage, even the government was giving funding to people who get married and have children and so forth. This was supported by the government because they saw the decrease of this society, and the decrease of society means the end of your civilization, because civilization is made up of marriages and children. When you attack marriages, you're attacking civilization, and the West understand this, and this is why they're trying to stop Muslim immigration in Europe, in Australia, in America, because they're taking over. The Muslims are taking over, and the West are like, no, we need to end immigration. We need to have bigger families now. We need to stop this, right? But they can't. They can't have bigger families because, again, it's about self-serving themselves. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to say, the Muslims can stay where they are. We need to stop Muslims coming into the West because we need to preserve our culture and our identity. But if we let Muslims come here, they'll breed like rabbits and they'll take over us and so forth. But they can't stop it. They're not going to be able to stop it because their whole theory and their mentality on their worldview is bankrupt, and it's now coming to a decline. And the statistics are now showing that by 2050, although Islam was 500 years behind Christianity and Judaism and so forth, Islam by 2050 will supersede the biggest religion, which is Christianity. And that's why they're saying, what's going on? What's happened? Well, what's happened is this. You demonized Islam, you demonized marriage, you favored secularism and liberalism, and now your generation is decreasing. It's going into reverse mode because you removed church from state. You've made a separation between church and state. And so you favored secularism and liberalism and all these ideas of feminism and so forth. So your population is now decreasing. Islam is overtaking that. And so now you've got nothing to do. You've got nothing left in the engine. You can only demonize the South Asian countries. You can demonize India. You can demonize the Muslim nations as the last straw in the hat, but it's your end now. You played with fire, now you're going to taste